presentation is about aquatic invasive species. Lisa Tedesco, I've known for quite some time, along with a lot of us, and she comes out to Christina Lake a lot. She's done an awful lot of work with all of us and never hesitates to say yes when we ask Lisa to attend something. Ecosystem biologist, Ministry of Forests, Lands and Natural Resource Operations, Nelson. She's going to be presenting information on aquatic invasive species of concern in the province and region. Let's welcome Lisa Tedesco.
So thanks for the introduction, and it's nice to be here. It's good to see faces, some new faces, and a lot of people I'm actually starting to recognize, which I like. It's nice to feel like you've been in an area long enough that you're starting to get to know it. I'm going to talk about aquatic invasive species today. Some of the information you guys are going to be familiar with. The community's been dealing with things like milfoil. Christina Lake Stewardship Society has been working on issues like the zebra and quagga mussels. Aquatic invasive species are, I guess, an emerging topic. There's starting to be more attention paid to it, both within government and externally. The presentation I'm giving today is adapted from one that was put together by Matthias Herborg, who's actually the aquatic invasive species specialist for the province. So there is now a dedicated staff person that does nothing but aquatic invasive species work. Matthias couldn't be here today, so I'm put this presentation together and kind of giving it on his behalf. It sounds like he's going to be coming out in January. Amazing guy, tons of knowledge. He's the expert. I'm the messenger at this point, I feel like. So British Columbia has a huge diversity of ecosystems, aquatic habitats, both freshwater and saltwater. So we're highly susceptible to invasion for species from around the world. So an alien species is any plant, animal, or microorganism that's from one part of the world transported beyond their natural range and becoming established in a new area. They're often called exotics, introduced, non-native, non-indigenous, or invasive species. Now, some of those terms have sort of a legal connotation. There's a noxious weed act. Others are just sort of general terminology. In order for an alien species to get established, they need an agreeable climate. So we have a lot of those, particularly in the southern portions of the province. We actually have a fairly agreeable climate. Warm summers, pretty mild winters, not too much snow. They need no or few predators, natural predators, parasites, or diseases. Because they're from different places, they come here. If their natural predators aren't here, they have an opportunity to establish. They need abundance of food, plants, or prey. We often have that. And they need the ability to outcompete native species. What am I using? That one. Okay. So currently, they're working on developing an aquatic invasive species database in the province. So what you see here is a map of what's currently known for aquatic invasive species sites. As you can see, tons of plants, 98 plants, and that's both fully aquatic plants like milfoil and ones that invade aquatic habitats, so things like knotweed and yellow flag iris, which you can find both out of the water and in the water. 24 invasive fish species, 5 species of amphibians, 3 of invertebrates, 2 turtles, and 1 algae. So that's across the province. As you can see, big concentrations in the highly populated areas, as well as some of our major river systems like the Columbia River and the Lower Fraser. This is sort of just a summary map. So these are our subunit drainages, so watersheds you can see in here in the Kettle River drainage. So Christina Lake is in that area. We're looking at between 13 and 18 aquatic invasive species that we know of. And again, you can see highest populated areas, highest numbers of aquatic invasive species. Not really surprising. So regionally, we're doing not bad. We got 9 species of invasive fish, 7 species of plants. The fish are quite well inventoried. Some of them, as we heard earlier, were because we put them there. The province put them there historically in the past, so we know that they're there. The plants, particularly because of the Boundary Weed Management Committee, we do have a pretty good regional knowledge of what's out there for plants. There's a lot of activity on the landscape there. At this time, we don't have any confirmed records of the invasive amphibians or reptiles. There's needs to be confirmed sighting of the algae, and I am going to talk about these individual species in a little bit. But there are also things close by that we want to keep an eye on. So there are invasive amphibians in the South Okanagan. There are some of the invasive fish species that we don't want to have come up here are currently in the West Kootenay and the Columbia system. And then there's also what we have south of us across the border in the United States. And the United States has been doing a lot of monitoring and mapping of this. So this is just looking at our invasive fish species. So again, you can see the boundary region right there. So we're at 0 to 10 fish species. And right across the border, which would be somewhere in here, they have 11 to 20 invasive fish species. So we can see that really close by, in areas that are connected to us by waterways, which fish can swim through, there are more invasive fish species. So it's important for us to be looking not just within our region, but also what's going on around us. So what do we have for invasive fish species? That's almost a tongue twister. The most common is brook trout, because it has been released quite readily for fisheries reasons, for fisheries purposes. And we find that pretty widespread throughout the Kettle River system and Christina Lake. Also have them in Moody Creek, Angelo Creek, and Glenside Creek, as well as others. There are yellow perch in Arlington Lake, so that's a fairly small lake system, and they're in Christina Lake as well. What we don't have yet, and a species that we don't have yet that we are concerned with, is the northern pike minnow. Now again, because fish can move on their own, if it swims up the Kettle River from the United States on its own, there really isn't a lot we can do about it. But if someone decides to put it in a bucket and move it, that's something that we could potentially do about it. Although a number of these fish species will provide good fishing opportunities, they can also be really destructive to their native ecosystems, eating the food that would naturally go to something like a rainbow trout or a kokanee. They can also damage amphibian and reptile populations. So a local example is Saddle Lake, which is just up above Grand Forks. At some point in the past, goldfish were released into Saddle Lake. This is one of the few breeding ponds for the tiger salamander, which is an endangered species. The goldfish eat the tiger salamander eggs. So the Granby Wilderness Society has got funding and is working on goldfish management, or eradication would be the long-term goal. So you can see how the introduction of a non-native species could severely impact a valuable native species or a native ecosystem. So aquatic plants, this is one that you guys are more familiar with than many. As I said, it's both fully aquatic plants like milfoil and curly pondweed, but also some of the riparian fringe species, so things like purple loosestrife, which is the third from the right, yellow flag iris, which is the third from the left, right? So milfoil is an ongoing issue in Christina Lake. We're going to hear more about that later. Barb, Stuart, and I have periodically been checking some of the smaller lakes in the community, like Conkle and Jewel, and so far those are milfoil free, but with boat traffic, those are the sorts of areas where you worry about these species going in the future. We do have known sightings of yellow flag iris. There are some purple loosestrife sightings in gardens. There isn't any in our native water systems yet, but so these are ones that we're going to be monitoring ongoing. Again, much like fish, they impact our native ecosystems. They can cause increased erosion because they have a very different root system than your native plants, so you can end up with more sediment running off into your creeks. They can invade into breeding and nesting habitat for species, so if something needs open, clean substrate, and you end up with an aquatic weed there, they can't breed there anymore, and you won't have that species over time. So again, lots of concerns with aquatic invasive plants. Algae and pathogens, these are the things you can't see but are actually really, really dangerous. So one of the biggest concerns in the area, or sort of across the province, is Didymo. So Didymo is an algae, and there are records of it from the west coast, from the island, from the 1800s, and they were always just small patches of Didymo, which is also called rock snot, because it looks like snot on a rock. And what they're finding now, they're starting to see more and more outbreaks, and not little patches, but covering huge stretches of rock, completely to the point where all you see is rocks covered in algae. And they think there may be some hybridization with a New Zealand strain. Somebody dumped an aquarium, or there's some sort of change happening to the native Didymo that's making it respond differently in our ecosystems. It can grow in stream habitats. Any of our freshwater systems would be fully susceptible. There's an unconfirmed sighting south of Westbridge, and Matthias has a sample, and then they're just verifying it. But so that's certainly one that we're concerned with. It can be spread on boats, any sort of fishing equipment, waders, wading boots, your nets, anything like that. And I'll talk more about management of these later. Other species of concern, pathogens of concern, there's whirling disease, which is a parasite that affects salmon and trout. It causes skeletal deformation as well as brain damage, and it basically means they can't swim straight. So they kind of end up swimming in circles, which means they can't get away from predators, and they die. Or they just are very, very unhealthy. So the picture on the far end, that's a fish that's affected by whirling disease. So you can see its tail is all bent up like that. It's not because it was put in a formaldehyde jar and got bent. It's because it's grown wrong. So with amphibians, there are two diseases that are being watched for across the province. Chytrid, which is a fungus. So you can see the green on that frog. That's a fungus. And ranavirus. The belief is that the funguses are associated with major population declines, large die-offs. So if the funguses come in, you'll get widespread reductions in population size, whereas the rhinovirus is more associated with just single mass mortality events, so it's more likely just to be centralized on a single pond or a single sort of system as opposed to spread off. But both can greatly impact our amphibian species. Mussels. So there was one slide earlier on about the zebra and quagga mussels. So right now, BC is zebra and quagga mussel free, and we would like to keep it that way. There was an instance just in the past summer where the border guards caught a boat coming up from the States that had quagga mussels or zebra mussels on it. So it's out there and it's happening. It's easy to spread. They're quite small. They're from 1 to 3 centimeters compared to our native mussels, which are usually between 5 and 8 centimeters, so the native mussels are quite a bit bigger. The zebra and quagga mussels attach to hard surfaces, which our native mussels do not. The native mussels bury into the mud. They stay in the sand. So as was mentioned, you saw that buoy that was brought up. They'll completely cover things like that. They'll get into water intakes, so your water intakes won't work anymore. And of course, again, they'll also impact native habitats. The other one of concern is the New Zealand mud snail, which is the one on the far end, and that scale bar doesn't do it justice. They're about the size of your pinky fingernail. They're really, really, really small. They come from aquariums, when people dump their aquariums, and there is a site on Vancouver Island. So that's something we're definitely really, really concerned about having come this way. So our amphibians and reptiles, as I had said earlier, there aren't any records currently in the boundary. But they are in the South Okanagan. So the two primary species of concern are the bullfrog, because people wanted to eat their legs many, many years ago. Somebody started a bullfrog farm, and then they didn't want to eat them anymore, and they let the bullfrogs out, and now we have bullfrog infestations. So bullfrogs are huge. They're 20 centimeters in length, not including their legs. So that's this one, bright green, really, really, really big. They'll eat anything and everything in a pond. So if they get into a pond that has breeding habitat for native amphibians, native reptiles, they'll eat their eggs, they'll eat the small mammals, they'll eat the insects, they'll eat juvenile fish, they eat everything. So a huge, huge problem. I also heard, Doug, you thought you had an unconfirmed sighting, so I've passed that on to the provincial amphibian specialist, and I'm going to get some information of how we can confirm that next spring. Because if that is out here, we want to get it on it really quickly so we can eradicate it. We don't want to have bullfrog getting into our native habitats. The other species is the slider, which is a turtle. So we have the painted turtle, which is native. It's about the size of a small dinner plate, a side plate. The slider is, again, it's an aquarium release. People get it as a pet. They don't want it anymore. They think the right thing to do is to put it into a pond and it competes and outcompetes our native species. The difference, how you can tell the difference between the slider and the painted turtle, the slider will have an orange or a yellow mark by its eye, and you won't be able to see it in this picture, but the slider's the furthest out on the end. And the painted turtle is really brightly colored, lots of color, but it won't have that distinct slash behind its eye. So 2 species that we don't have here, they are in nearby areas, and they're probably in people's houses as pets, and so we need to make sure those don't get out. So how are these getting here? Well, unfortunately, Christina Lake has lots of boaters, and boats are one of the primary ways that some of these species are getting spread. Whether it's in the water that's contained in the boat, so bilge water or water in an engine, or actually attaching physically to the boat itself or to the toys and the equipment that people have on boats. It can get on, some of these can get on life jackets, they could get on wakeboards, tubes, that sort of thing. And the movement of these boats and equipment from one water system to another is one of the primary ways these are spread. Waders, fishing gear, if people have caught fish and they're keeping them live and have, well, which is illegal, I guess, moving any water between systems. There's the intentional release of unwanted pets, as I discussed with things like the slider. So people saying, well, I just don't want it anymore. I'm going to release it, or I need to empty my aquarium water. I'm going to dump it down the storm drain. Your storm drain does connect to your streams and your lakes, and that will be released, despite your best intention. On the Lower Mainland, they've had issues with spiritual releases. So with some religions, Buddhism is one of them, they want to release a live animal. It gives them karma. Well, that's not very good if you're releasing a carp into a native pond. There's imports from live fish markets, aquariums, agriculture escapees, which we don't have as much of an issue with. And then, of course, there are the intentional moves. So whether that was historic stockings to provide fisheries opportunities, or illegal movement of fish by fishermen that want to create opportunities for themselves. So these are some of the most common pathways of introduction that we're facing. They did a bit of an assessment for our invasive fish species on kind of how that panned out and how many we're getting here in what ways. The majority of our fish have shown up because of illegal stocking. So 12 of the species are because people took it upon themselves to move a fish from one place to another to create a fishing opportunity. 9 of the species are because of historic authorized stockings. We thought the province thought it was a good idea, and so they did it. 6 are natural dispersals, so fish do have the ability to move. If a stream opens up that wasn't opened up previously, or coming in from, say, the Columbia, fish can get through. Pet releases, a couple of them, aquaculture escapees. But so you can see how it pans out. There is really good information of fish. We don't have this for any of the other species at this stage. What are we going to do about it? One of the biggest things are cleaning and disinfecting, and I will have a little bit more information on that on the next slide. But there are some disinfection guidelines for fishing gear and recreational boats. We're working across communities and across the border to start finding some common messaging so that no matter where people go, whether it's in Okanagan County, the East Kootenays, the Boundary, or the Okanagan, they're getting the exact same message about cleaning their equipment and why. So that's something that's being worked on. There's, it's illegal, so there's laws, it's illegal to transport live fish. There's a lot of non-native species that it's illegal to import, so we do have laws to work on some of this. There's a government committee that's been formed to deal with the spiritual releases. So if anybody is aware of anything like that that's happening in the Boundary, where there are groups that are wanting to carry out those sorts of activities, let me know, because that's something that we can work with them on to prevent kind of that intentional spread. Like I said, so we've got our laws to deal with illegal fishing. We're working on outreach and enforcement. So talking with people, communicating, letting them know that this isn't permitted. Some of the other management techniques are working with the catch limits for fish. 2 techniques: you either let them catch as many of the invasive species as they want, just because they're there and it doesn't matter if you deplete the population. The other technique is to strictly limit how many people can take, because then the incentive to release fish elsewhere so that the opportunity can be had more widely isn't there. So 2 approaches that the province is taking on catch limits. There have been some eradication efforts. It's really intensive. I don't know if there's plans for any more, but that's generally through things like rotenone. So there's been Lake Koocanusa, Garden Lake in the Okanagan. There have been a few of those, really intensive, a lot of work, a lot of permitting, a lot of other concerns and considerations need to be given when a community looks at eradication. So preventing spread. So we talked about some of the consistent messaging. So check, clean, dry, clean, drain, dry. There's some consistent messaging that's being worked on. With boats, number one is following some good operation practices. So there's the no boating zone at the north end of the lake where people are asked to either not go or pull up their prop. When your prop cuts through aquatic invasive plants, it spreads them. So avoiding those areas with your boats is a great way to start. When you get out, removing any of the visible plant parts, getting them off, any invisible mussels if you happen to see them, cleaning everything that comes in contact with water, draining all of the water out of your boat so that you're not moving it from one system to another. For cleaning, it does need to be hot and high pressure, so they recommend 104 degrees with a pressure washer. So certainly that presents a challenge for a lot of people. So there's talk about, can we establish boat washing stations? What would that cost? Where has that been done? To help aid people in doing the right thing with their boats. With equipment, so that's if you're fishing or if you're snorkeling, any of the equipment you use for those activities become great methods of transport for things like dynamo. You only need one cell of dynamo for a new population to establish. One cell. Can't see that. So cleaning is a must anytime you move between systems. So we're looking at maybe doing some education work with our fly fishermen. It's really easy to clean your gear. Bleach and water. It's 2% bleach. And it's 2 minutes, and you've killed dynamo. All you gotta do is, I have a bucket. I meant to bring it. Oh, I didn't. There's a bucket over there. It's just bleach in a bucket. We brought a system for our office. It literally is a Tupperware bin, a measuring cup, and a bottle of bleach with the instructions taped on the top. It's really easy. Now, one of the other methods is freezing, so you can just throw your gear in the freezer overnight if you know you're going to be fishing in the Granby one day and in the Christina Lake the next. Throw your gear in the freezer overnight, freezes solid. That'll kill things. And I do have the information on the side there with the disinfection instructions, so people can grab that. And there's several options available. It's really, really important if you're moving between systems that gear starts being clean. Reporting and resources. So if you see an aquatic invasive plant, you can report it on the Report a Weed on the Invasive Alien Plant Program website, or you can let our steward know, or myself know. And then this will get fed into that database that the province is building so we can track over time where do we have things, where are we seeing them show up. If you get information on a new invasive fish introduction, you can contact your regional LNRO office. You can also include Matthias, his email is there, and he will follow up with that. For frogs and reptiles, you can report to Frogwatch BC. They have a website and kind of a report a critter site, or you can let me know. Anything else, you can send it to Matthias. And so I said there's the disinfection guidelines on the side table, and there's also an information page that has a bunch of websites. I had the slide in, and when I put it up at the last time I did this presentation, everyone had it like this, because there was tons of text and links. So I printed the page, and it's on the side there. And there's websites, both from internally in BC as well as outside across the border. A lot of good information and resources. So it's an emerging issue. Christina has been dealing with some portions of it for a long time. With the Stewardship Society in place and an active community, I think you're in a great position to be addressing these issues. We do need to still be doing a lot more with inventory. There's a lot of things that might be out there. We just haven't been looking before now. And then research and education. The invasive species database is the first time anyone's really tried to bring all that information together across the province. So it'll take a couple of years to get it really well refined, but it's a good start for us to be able to track. We do have a number of species, but they're still limited in distribution, and hopefully we can keep it that way by implementing good management practices and getting some of that education and outreach out in the community. And that's it.
There's these over here, wealth of information. Thank you very much, Lisa. Is there any questions for Lisa? Okay, good. Thanks.
Oh, oops.
You didn't mention you would report biomass.
Sorry? Oh,
Oh,
let Matthias know if you have any of those. And if you're interested in sampling for zebra and quagga mussels, Christina, like Stewardship Society, has little kits. You just put that on the end of your dock, and you just watch to see if the zebra and quagga mussels show up, and that would be incredibly valuable. The more of those we have on the way, the better.
And I'll mention, they didn't get shipped over from the University of Portland, but they have actually sent a box of their resin paperweights that actually have the quagga and the zebra mussels. So when we get those in the office, people are welcome to come down. They're free. Also, they're shipping us a bunch of mussels and whatever of the Pacific Northwest, which has really good picture plates of those. So those will be free as well. So they're supplying those. They just didn't get it across the border in time.
And there are some samples of the different mussels in little Ziploc bags over there, which you're lucky to have those within a friend because they're great.
That's university.
Okay.
And I'll give you those seats because that's sweet.
Okay, and if you're not all aware, the stewardship has an office just on the kitchen part of just outside. You can go around the other door and come into the hall the other way. They're there, and Brenda will actually give you the hours and everything after for that.